Hey, my name is Julie Williamson. I'm the CEO of Karrikin's Group. We were one of the Colorado Company to Watch alumni in 2018. I think it was hard to believe that it was 7 years ago. I will say that one of the things that we really benefited from as we went through the process, and many of you who are in the room who are alumni probably did as well, is the level of scrutiny that it gave us on our business. Got us really thinking about how were we running the business? How were we thinking about scaling it? And that was incredibly helpful for us as we moved into a growth cycle for ourselves. So thank you to all of the Colorado Companies to Watch people who had the vision to say, here in Colorado, we've got a lot of startups, we've got a lot of smaller companies. How do we help them really fuel the engine of growth in Colorado and in the economy? One of the ways is by helping them to be better businesses. And I do think that we became a better business as a result of going through that process. So thank you very much for that. As I said, I'm the CEO of Karrikin's Group. My colleague Kate is here with me. She chairs our Alignment Institute, and my colleague Daniel is here with me as well. He's one of our HOW activators. We're really delighted to be here to share with you a little bit about our passion in life, which is closing the gap between agreement and alignment. And we just heard from Dan about a great way to be in agreement about something. Great idea to focus on our talent pipeline, right? Great idea to get people into some of these trades. Great idea to encourage people. How do we move from agreement to alignment on that? By taking action and stepping into action around those kinds of things. It's really easy in business to agree to things. It can be very difficult to align and deliver on them. So that is really the problem set that Karrikin's Group focuses on. We focus on making how matter. And that's what we're just going to share a little bit with you about today. I'm going to do a little talking, and then Kate's going to get up here and do a workshop with you, get you on your feet a little bit, let you play around with the materials. And a win would be if you walk out of the door today just thinking a little bit more about where in your own businesses you may be in agreement that something's a great idea, but you're not necessarily aligned as a team to how are you going to do it together, because that will really unlock growth for you as a business if you can get there. So why do we care so much about this? Does anybody know what January 10th was? What holiday did we celebrate on January 10th, 2025? Anyone know? That's because it wasn't actually a holiday, but it was Quit Day. Quit Day is the day that consistently, year after year, we do all sorts of research in social science, and year after year, around the second Friday of January, New Year's resolutions go out the window. Right? Anybody make a New Year's resolution this year? Or I know they're kind of not in vogue anymore, but commitments, anything like that? Kind of, sort of. What was yours? You do goals. That's fair. That's fair. Do an out of the ordinary activity every month. Have you stuck with it? Excellent. So you've gotten past Quit Day. She deserves applause for that. She does deserve applause, because that is not true. Most people are really stuck in, because business as usual just takes over. Life as usual just takes over. It's a really interesting phenomena that our deeply ingrained habits are just incredibly hard to break. And so we really struggle with that. We struggle with it in business as well. And in business, it can have really big ramifications. This is just some data from a company that talked to around 100 small business startups that failed. So specifically talking with business leaders that failed. One of the interesting things that jumped out at me about this is that about 25 or 26% of the reasons are pretty tactical. So things that happened in legal, operations, tech, finance, those types of things. But about 75% of them are more around leadership. So, and also around things that have to do with alignment. When you think about, for example, product and market fit, a lot of times for small businesses, we get really locked in on what we are passionate about doing. We think this product is the best thing ever. But we're not innovating, we're not collaborating, we're not necessarily listening to the market, listening sometimes to our employees, because we're so laser focused on what it is that we want to do. We're so passionate about it. And that can leave us in misalignment with the market. It means that our product and our market don't quite match. By the way, at Karrikin's Group, we've struggled with that over the years. So sometimes we're just like, yes, this is the best thing ever. And the market's like, nah, is it though? Right? And we have to stay aligned to this idea of continuing to innovate, continuing to push forward on our products. We lost it again. But I think this other idea, as we look at the other part of that 75%, you're going to see team effectiveness in there. You're going to see also this idea of marketing. By the way, in small business development and marketing, real easy to agree. We need to do more. Like we need to do more in business. We need to be better. We need to be better in business development. We need to be better in marketing. But it's really hard sometimes to align and deliver on that. So those are some of the ways in which alignment or misalignment can be incredibly costly for small businesses. So as we think about closing this space, I think we really want to focus on why is it that it's so easy to get stuck in agreement as we're growing our businesses? And sometimes as business leaders, it's because we just think everybody else just knows. They just know what it is that we need to do. But as you're growing your business and you're bringing more people in, you have to really focus on alignment. And right now, I think that the projector is misaligned with my goals. Luckily, I know this content very, very well. I think one of the things that we really focus on at Karrikin's Group is thinking about what are some of the really easy things that we often agree to, that we just say, yep, that's going to be super easy for us to do. And then we just don't do it. How many of you as business owners have things like that on your list? Yeah, your things like, yeah, that would just be so easy if we just did it. And why aren't we doing it? Kristen, what's something that you have? So I love that example because my colleague Daniel and I just got back from a conference, and how many of the sessions were about AI? Maybe 110%, right? Yeah. And how many of you are faced with things like, we should really be learning more about AI? We should be thinking about how AI is impacting our business. And how many of you are actually in alignment with your team about how you're going to do that? It's a great example. I really appreciate that. So one of the things that we look for when we're looking for misalignment is the idea of what we call the woulda, coulda, shouldas. There's a really famous Shel Silverstein poem, which you will see momentarily when the screen comes back. But this idea of the woulda, coulda, shouldas, if we would have done that, if we could have done that, if we should have done that. And when we get into those woulda, coulda, shouldas in business, that's a sign that we're not aligned. We have misalignment around what we're doing. And that's a really good indicator. And what I want you to listen for as business leaders is listen for that woulda, coulda, shoulda. Listen for that, if only we had been more innovative, we should have invested more in marketing. We really should collaborate more. All of these things, they're great indicators that you probably are stuck in misalignment about that particular topic. So it's just a little mental cue for you. By the way, it works in your life too. So I don't want you to get to December and be like, oh, I really should have taken that trip, right? You're doing good. You're in March. That's awesome. Keep it up, right? Yeah. Yeah. And in a year, right, Kristen, your team will be like, oh, we really should have done 15 minutes a day, right? I went to Patagonia a couple of years ago and I was like, I will learn Spanish. And what did I do? I paid for a year-long subscription to Babbel. And then the day before I left on my trip, which was the day that the year was up, it renewed automatically, but I had not done a single lesson. So I did not learn Spanish over the whole year because I just didn't get there, right? There's a lot of woulda, coulda, shoulda in my thinking around it. And that's where you find that space between agreement and alignment, what we call the failure gap. And the failure gap is where a lot of great ideas go to die. I'm sure you got a couple of business ideas that are in that space. So here's why it's costly. From a personal perspective, Americans spend almost $400 million on gym memberships that they do not use. That's shocking, isn't it? Has anybody ever done that though? Anybody? Yeah. Signed up for something and then you're like, next week. Between people who just don't use it or people who underutilize it tremendously, it's really hard. It's really easy to be in agreement that it would be a good idea if only I would go to the gym, but it's really hard to align yourself and get yourself there to do it together. In business, it also has pretty big ramifications. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But the reason that this happens, the reason we get stuck in misalignment is often because there's a context gap, especially across teams. It's one thing to try and align yourself to go to the gym. Think about how hard that is, right? It's hard to get yourself to get into alignment with something that you personally agree to. Getting a group of people to align and deliver together is even harder, in part because we all bring different kinds of context into the decisions and behaviors that we exhibit at work. I'll give you a quick example. Years ago, I did work at the VA at one of their call centers. Now, the VA has a beautiful mission, right, which is delivering on President Lincoln's promise to our service people. It's a beautiful mission. About 80% of the people who worked in the call center had either served or had a direct relative who served in the military. So they knew firsthand a lot about it. And there was a huge problem in the VA with fraud, waste, and abuse. So there were two things that they were asking call center people to focus on. One was, I want you to make sure that service people, when they call in, they get quick, responsive care, and they're able to get what they need very fast. And the other was, you need to control for fraud, waste, and abuse. Now, people bring different context in. So if there's somebody who has really firsthand knowledge about fraud, waste, and abuse, and they're saying, oh, well, when that happens, people are stealing from our service people and interfering with our ability to deliver on President Lincoln's promise all those years ago, then they're going to ask 25 questions and keep someone on the phone for an hour interrogating them to make sure that the person is making a valid claim. Because if you are making an invalid claim, you're stealing from service members who served. You're stealing from the people who deserve it, right? So good intentions, they're super focused on that. That's their context. They're going to make sure that only people who earned that benefit are going to get the benefit. And then on the other side, you have the person who's thinking, gosh, my son or daughter got back from Afghanistan and it was so hard for them to get what they needed. So if somebody calls me, man, I'm going to get that. I'm going to be yes, yes, yes. I'm going to make sure that they get what they need as fast as they can, because my context is I had a family member who really struggled. And so I want to make sure nobody else has that experience. So they're both trying to deliver on the mission. They're making very different decisions and exhibiting different behaviors as they go forward, because the organization hadn't done the work to have the conversation about context. And what does it mean as a call center rep in that situation to thread that needle between making sure that somebody can get connected to the services that they need and that we're reasonably controlling for fraud and abuse? Because there's vagueness in there, right? There's a lack of clarity around what exactly that means. And so building a ton of processes and implementing a bunch of technology to try to force the right behaviors from the call center reps was not working. What they needed to do was help the call center reps understand how to navigate the context that they were bringing in. So just a quick example of where this shows up in business, and it shows up on all of your teams too, because you might be saying to your teams, we really need to grow. Well, guess what? Growth means a lot of different things, right? Could mean we need more revenue. Could mean we need market share. Could mean we need more clients. Could mean all of these things. We need a geographic expansion. We need more products. So your people are probably bringing very different context into concepts like we need to grow. So everybody might agree with it, but they might not be aligned on how to deliver that together because they need to close that gap in context. This graph is from Morgan Housel. Has anybody read The Psychology of Money? Yeah, it's a pretty good book, I think. Don't you think? Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that he talks about is that we build all of these spreadsheets to try and get people to make good decisions about money, but people don't do that, do they? Why? Because it depends on what your life experience is. So one of the things that he shows in this graph is that people who were born in the 1950s, in their formative years about money, which is in your teenage years into your 20s, experienced a flat to declining stock market. People who were born in the 70s, in their formative years about money, experienced a growing stock market. So generationally, they tend to make very different decisions about how they feel about and how they orient towards stocks. Now, there are always outliers. There are people who were born in the 50s who are super aggressive in the stock market, super comfortable with it, no worries. There are people born in the 70s who are super conservative about it. Absolutely, that does happen. But if you look longitudinally across the generations, you see very specific behavior patterns about how people show up when asked to make decisions about their investment portfolios, in part because of what was happening when they were in their formative years about finance. Same thing happens with your colleagues. They're coming in and they're bringing in their own experiences into their decisions about how they're going to work for you and how they're going to show up when you ask them to do different things, because it's about the context of what was going on as they were developing their sort of neural pathways around the decisions that they make and the behaviors that they bring. When we talk about this in the context of organizations, strategic misalignment, we talked about the cost of gym memberships, and that's $400 million. But when we talk about the cost of strategic misalignment in organizations, it can really create a significant challenge, especially if you're trying to go through a big transformation or trying to do something significant in terms of growth with your company. Even a little bit of misalignment across your team will create ultimately outcomes that are subpar for your organization. So I really just want you to think about this again as you're thinking about growing your company. And again, we do this at Karrikin's Group. What's the level of alignment that we need to those big goals so that people are making decisions about their small goals in a way that's consistent and that we understand what's sitting behind their decisions and behaviors? Now, it's not easy. I will tell you this. It's really tempting as a business owner just to put a process in place or to buy a technology and think that the problem's going to be solved. But one of the things we know at Karrikin's Group, we use this behavior model as a lens through which we think about alignment. So if there's something that is misaligned, we run it through here. So if you think about outcomes like growth, The outcome that we want is we need to grow the company, and we need to do that through top line revenue. We need more clients, and we need more revenue coming in the door. Making this up, right? Then we need everybody making decisions and exhibiting behaviors that support that goal and that definition of growth. And so we have to back that up to what are the trade-offs that people experience as they're trying to decide how to support that growth. Those trade-offs are often informed by people's mindsets and the group dynamics that they're experiencing in your company. But where leaders love to put their time and money and resources is in organizational factors, right? So we're just going to build the perfect process that nobody will get wrong. Anybody ever tried to build the perfect process? Yeah. How good is that, right? Yeah, it's tricky. Now, I'm a fan for technology and process. Don't get me wrong. You need to have those foundations in place, but you can't expect them to shape people's behavior fully. I have, by the way, been in the re-engineering process of so many sales teams. How many of you work with salespeople or you are a salesperson? How much do salespeople love process? Yeah, some of them do really well with it, but a lot of them find ways to work around it, right? Because they're just trying to get to what they need to do. You can't put all of your faith in organizational factors. Organizational factors are an important part of how people show up when they hit trade-offs, but what really kicks in are those individual mindsets and those group dynamics. And again, we're going to give you a chance to just kind of play around with this a little bit in just a minute. But before we go there, I just want to give you an example from Karrikin's group. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and kind of where I struggle. Anybody do time reporting at your companies? Yeah, we're a professional services company, so you would expect that we do pretty good time reporting. We did not for a long time. And as a matter of fact, we had a great system in place. We use Paylocity. It's pretty easy to use. We have time codes, all this kind of stuff. But I was really struggling, and I'm the CEO. Like, I'm supposed to be doing these things right, but I actually was not doing it very well myself. And also just throughout the group dynamics across the organization, we didn't do a great job with it. There's a lot of reasons for it that I won't go into from a business perspective, but just use this as a really simple example. So we needed clean time reporting. That's what I was asking everybody to do. Get better at your timesheet. And I was asking myself to do that. And so we had to think about, okay, we've got the right system in place. We've got the right processes defined. We've communicated. We've done the WIFM. We've done all that change management stuff, blah, blah, blah. And we're still struggling. We're still not getting there. And so we ran it through the behavior model and we took a look at it to say, okay, if the outcome is that we need good enough data in our systems that we can have reliable cost of goods sold so that we can scale the business the way that we want to, right? That's a very reasonable outcome to want to have in terms of your business. And we need people to then decide to take the time, because it does take, it takes a nanosecond of extra time, right? It doesn't take that much extra time, but it does, 15 minutes to do AI, right? It doesn't take that much time, but we need people to make the decision to do it right. When people were used to just kind of shoving things into overhead codes and not worrying about it. Well, it turns out that that's the trade-off that we're making. One of the mindsets that influences that pretty significantly is that some people were thinking it only counts as client work. It only counts as project work if it's client facing. And by the way, I was one of those people, because for me, all of the behind the scenes work that I do with the team, that actually is part of our cost of goods sold. That is part of what it takes for us to deliver projects. But I was kind of lazy, and I was like, well, if I'm not sitting in front of the client, then it doesn't really count. I'm not going to worry about it. That's what I was saying to myself, right? But it was impacting our ability to really understand the data that we use to drive our company. So I had to shift my mindset to, if I'm working on the client outcomes, then I have to record my time properly. I know this sounds silly, by the way. If all of you people are good at recording your time correctly, you're probably like, Julie, what is wrong with you? Right? But really, truly, this was a blind spot for me and for others in our business, and we had to work on it. And we were working on it with process and technology, and it wasn't getting us anywhere. But when I started to really think for myself, okay, one of my mindsets is, if I'm not sitting across from a client, I don't have to worry about it. That was holding us back. And so we got to some conversation around shifting that mindset instead of trying to ensure process compliance. One of the group dynamics, by the way, was that It kind of left it up to individuals to decide, like, is this meeting something that we should put towards the project, or is this meeting something that we don't put towards the project? And so a group dynamic that we could use to reinforce the behavior that we were looking for is to start meetings or end meetings just with some clarity, create some clarity in that moment around where should your time go. Simple things. And I realize this is a very simple example, but I just want you to be thinking a little bit about some of these things that you might be in agreement in your business. Something as simple as we should all do better with our time reporting. What's getting in the way of being aligned to that? Why do we all agree that that's a good idea, but we're not aligned? And it's probably more to do with the mindsets and the group dynamics that are influencing people and how they make trade-offs than it is to do with the technology or the processes that you have in your organization. Again, those are important. You should have those dialed in. Definitely look at that. But it is not a panacea. It doesn't solve everything. You've got to get to these mindsets and group dynamics. And that takes conversation. That takes being in dialogue with people and really trying to understand what's behind the behavior that you're looking for. So we look at that through the lens of the diamond triangle, which you saw maybe on one of the earlier slides, but that might have been when we were out of alignment on our presentation. But the diamond triangle for us is all about knowing what you're going to do and why you're doing it, but also knowing how you're going to do it together. And that means being really clear, having clarity and connection to your mindsets, your group dynamics, your organizational factors, the trade-offs and blockers that people are experiencing. And then making sure that you have commitment to the behavior changes and the shifts that are needed so that you have the courage to change when it gets hard, which it always does. People always are confronted with those moments where they would rather do something else, I don't know, maybe Instagram, I don't know, than their 15 minutes of AI, right? So how do we work through that with people and help them to have the courage to hold the line when it gets tough? And being in dialogue, having conversation with people is how we do that, by having the right conversations about the mindsets and group dynamics that might be holding them back. So that's a really quick overview of the work that we do at Karrikin's Group and why we think closing the failure gap, closing the space between agreement and alignment is so important. And we do a lot of our work with enterprise level companies where the complexity at an enterprise level is pretty high. But even in small businesses, this idea of misalignment is something that can hold you back, especially if you're trying to scale your organization. Because when you start to scale, other people have to come along with you. Your business has to become more than just your vision. And that means that you have to be able to really understand how to get people to take that journey with you, not just do what you need them to do, but make the right decisions and exhibit the right behaviors when you're not around to tell them what the answer is. And that is where you get into this issue of alignment. So I'd really encourage you to think about it. Again, Kate's going to lead us through a workshop so you can actually get on your feet a little bit. We're going to do some worksheets. We're going to have some opportunity for you to have some conversations with each other and just think a little bit about how this comes up in your own business. But before we do that, I just want to say, if you are interested in more about this, you can check out our podcast, which is The Failure Gap. And there we've got interviews with some great leaders, some of them from people around Colorado as well, talking about their own personal experiences with being in the failure gap and also how they're seeing that show up in their businesses. So it's a fun opportunity just to hear some real life stories from the trenches of people who are struggling with that. And I would say that at Karrikin's Group, we always say this old expression, to go fast, go alone, to go far, go together, to go far fast, get aligned, and you will do it better and faster. So thank you very much for your time. I'm going to turn it over to Kate. She's going to give us the opportunity, like I said, to get our hands a little dirty with this. And I appreciate your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Julie. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Thanks for your patience with our slides. I think we're back in business now. As Julie mentioned, we want to get you some experiences to get up out of the tables and experience what alignment looks and feels like. So we're going to go through an exercise here. I'm going to stop sharing that real quick. I need 8 volunteers, please. Thank you so much.
One brave soul.
All right. All right. So get close into each other. Touch your shoulders. The vertical line here. There we go. There we go. All right. Closer in, closer in, closer in. Okay. There we go. Excellent. All right. Please take your fingers and hold 2 fingers out like this. All right. Excellent. And the idea here is that as a group, you're going to be moving. Julie's going to put a tent pole on your fingers. And as a group, you need to lower the tent pole to the ground. You can't curl your fingers around the tent pole. You got to keep your fingers straight. And just as a group, you're going to lower it to the ground. And if you lose contact with the pole, you got to start over. But to start over means start back at this level. Okay? Like that's fine. Okay. So you guys ready to go? All right, and shoulder to shoulder, fingers out. No curling fingers. My colleague Daniel is going to help pass out some tent poles, and I'll bring some around as well. And if you have more than 8 people, that's fine. All right. So here we go. So we'll bring you a tent pole. 1 finger. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess technically 2 fingers. You can touch 2 fingers total. And you're going to lower the tent pole to the ground. All right. So as a group, the goal is to lower the tent pole to the ground. If your fingers lose contact, start over. All right. This last group, you got it? Woo! Excellent. The rest of the groups, keep doing it. We believe in you. All right, we got 2 groups finished and 2 groups still working on it. Why was that so hard? You have to be in alignment. What else? Okay, so some balance. Communication, strategy, staying focused. So counterintuitive because you end up pushing up when you want it to go down. And why do you think you're pushing up? Yes, exactly. And nobody wants to be the person to stop touching the pole, right? Like everybody in a team is like, I don't want to be the one who lets go of the pole because then everybody's going to blame me because the pole's not going down. However, what happens, right, is that the pole ends up going up. So it's called the helium challenge because the pole ends up rising. And so you're like, what the heck? Why is the pole going up? Which is a great example of what alignment feels like because we all agree we want the pole to go down. But to be in alignment to make the pole go down takes communication and strategy and patience and being on the same speed and not trying to go right at different pace. So, I mean, it's awkward. And then when it really works, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. We got the pole down. So that, I'm sure you had examples in your organizations where you're like, why is the pole going up? We all agreed we were going to do this, and it is not happening. So that's a fun thing to do with your teams. All you need is a tent pole. And it really is helpful. And we do this with all of the leadership teams that we work with. And every single leadership team takes at least 10 minutes to get the pole down. I mean, there's not a single team we work with who gets it right down, except the ones that cheat. They got the curled fingers or they got the fingers on top. So that is just a good, to come back to that when you're feeling like with your team, you can come back to this feeling of like, why is the pole going up? Well, we need, as Julie mentioned, we need to pause and get really clear about what we're doing and how we're doing it together. So as Julie mentioned here, we talked about the difference between agreement and alignment. And alignment is really where you take action and you see a difference. It's not just saying, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's get the pole down to the ground. But I'm going to change my own behavior personally. I'm going to start with self as a leader to say, well, I need to first pause. This might take a little bit more time than I thought it was going to. And I'm going to be really clear with my team. And I actually like the group up front. I think you were doing a really nice job of saying, okay, the middle, down. And you were like kind of coaching everyone to go down. So having somebody in that role is very helpful as well. Anything that worked really well for you there? We've also had teams like close their eyes. There's lots of different strategies with that. But this is the difference between agreement and alignment. Alignment is where we're all showing up in a new way to get to the outcome that we want. So on your tables, there is an 11 by 17 piece of paper. Anybody can take notes. We were going to originally have the table leads do it, but it's fine if anybody wants to take notes. And go around and we'll just spend about 5 minutes sharing agreement statements that you often hear in your organizations. Yeah, so an example of agreement statement was what Julie was saying. We all agree that we need to put our timesheet in with the right codes. Or another agreement statement say we all agree that we want to collaborate more. Or we need to be more innovative. Or we need to, get our salespeople working in a different way. Like those are all agreement statements that everyone can say, yes, of course, we should be doing that. All right, looks like we've got a lot of good examples. I'm going to start with this table over here. What are you coming up with? I'm going to share my microphone.
We have fail fast, culture of growth, collaborative efforts between teams, work on time/deadline driven, client comes first, share success stories internally, communicate, and if you have extra time, help others.
Those are a lot of agreement statements. Hands raised if a lot of those were familiar to you. You hear them at your organizations as well. All right, and what about for you, Kristen?
Well, we were following your kind of script of the we need to. So we need to get our expense reports in on time. We didn't collaborate. You want to?
Yeah, and then we need to be more efficient. Need to call more clients. Need to execute in our plan. Better prioritize our time and our day.
Increase revenue by $5 million.
We all agree to keep our accounts updated in our CRM.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And we all agree there's a fortune in follow-up.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'll just get one more back here because everybody's shaking their head yes to a lot of these.
We had a lot of we need statements. So we need structure, we need clarity, we need accountability, we need to understand our priorities.
All right, so a lot of we need to, a lot of we should. We said that we were going to, and we haven't yet. So, as Julie mentioned, we think about alignment through the 4 C's. So clarity, connection, commitment, and courage. We need to have clarity about what we're doing. We need to be connected to the people and the parts of the business that we're doing that work with. We need to be committed to shifting our ways of working to get that work done, and then have the courage to show up differently with each other and hold each other accountable to that new way of working. And so one of the first ways to get to clarity is to get really clear about where you're stuck. So all of the agreement statements that you just shared are where, we're often stuck in agreement and we haven't moved into alignment. And one of the tools that can be really helpful to shift that is to notice that we're doing that and then name that something. And the name can be something neutral, it can be something funny, but it really just provides an opportunity for people to talk about it in a way that doesn't feel personal. Like Joe's not doing his part of the job. It's saying, no, we've noticed that we set up standards and processes and we're all not following them. So we're going to call that Freddie because it's a nightmare. That's the example that's on your worksheet. So I wanted to take the different agreement statements that you've identified, and there's a notice and name worksheet on your table, and just spend some time thinking about what you would name that situation so that you can start to have a new conversation with your teams about where you're stuck in agreement.
And maybe, Kate, each table could pick 1 or 2 that someone has shared, and you can go with it. And I'm thinking about that one about sales. We should keep the sales system up to date. And we talked with someone years ago that I remember who named that the colander and the bucket, because it was either a colander, the sales system was either a colander or it was a bucket. And so when salespeople were struggling, they would say, you have a colander, not a bucket. So it's just an example of noticing and naming, right? That's a situation where we all agree we should be doing that better, and we're not. And so how do we make it something that we can attach to in a different way and make it more visible when it happens? So maybe pick 1 or 2 of the statements that you shared at your table and then workshop it together.
Yeah, that sounds great. So we'll give you a couple minutes to do that. All right, so Carrie's got an example for us of where her teams are stuck in agreement, and she's got a fun name for it. Again, no pressure around the names. It doesn't have to be pithy. That just helps us remember them. But I like this one.
So the agreement is that we should all show up on time. So we could name that situation "On Time is Late."
Because people are not, they're late. Yeah. Even though we've all agreed that we need to be on time. Yeah, exactly. All right. And it's Sam, you had a good one.
Yeah. One of mine, I'm in mental health care. We need to collect insurance cards at check-in, and the name for that is Karen because she's a bitch.
That one sounds quite personal, but just a little bit personal. What about at this table?
So we were coming up with, we were focused on sales, and everybody wants go deliver the sales, right? But our word around that was sales is a dirty word. and shifting to other words like solutions, relationships, benefits. So that was what we came up with on that one. And then on following up, we want people to follow up faster. And that one we talked about it being a shiny object syndrome. So don't get lost in the shiny object syndrome.
I think you could also have let's do Formula One follow-up. Yeah, Formula One follow-up. Let's do it fast and let's do it right. Like something like that. That's really sticky for people, right? So we're always harping on people to follow up fast. If you shift the language if you name that, right, notice that's what's happening. And I'm going to name that Formula One follow-up. So now when I say to you, we need Formula One follow-up on this, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? So you're going to walk out of the room and be able to act on it in a different way. So that's how this shift in language can really start to move people just a little bit. By the way, to get alignment, you don't have to move people super far. We always talk about the idea of nudges, not shoves. You just need to get people a little bit different. They don't have to be a lot different. And that's another mistake we make as leaders. We try and make people a lot different when all we need is a little bit. So think about that as well with this notice and name exercise. If it's something that can just anchor people in a slightly different behavior, that's a huge win. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. I think each table's come up with some good ones, so I'm going to keep going around.
So we talked about needing more accountability and ownership. So we made a little play on CRMs. So we call it, I can't remember Mary. So, and just talking about having, there's no owning going on. So we're not leasing. So both feet need to be in the door.
Yeah. I like that. Can't remember Mary. Awesome. What about this table?
So we talked a lot about timely responses, and the desire of having an organizational timely response. And a lot of the discussion that we had is it's kind of based on context of the organization and of the employee. If it's just a matter of getting back to someone on a quick basis, that's easy. But if it's very detailed work and, spreadsheets and this and that, a timely response could be when they're done, which could be 2 days. So, in that mindset, we wanted to go ahead and maintain context. So we really just nicknamed it Clear Deadline. But
how do we just remind each other that sometimes it's just a quick update? It's not that it's done, but if you just go from request to done, and that's going to take a couple days, then you're not giving people the benefit of giving you the runway that you need, right? So there might be something fun in that. And it doesn't, again, have to always be fun, but just something more memorable in that space of what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to have the right amount of runway to do what we need to do and to do it correctly. And sometimes all that takes is an update.
It's basically analysis by paralysis. Ultimately, it's instead of taking action, new ideas get bogged down in process. Basically committee overload, getting a committee together before you launch something and making sure that everybody's thinking about whatever. And then steps are never taken. It never launches. And so we're calling that turtling because
I love
really
that.
slow and not. So you're turtling. Come on, keep up. Let's get it done.
And just think about how much, though, more relaxed people are, right? If you say to them, are we turtling? Then if you say, are we stuck? Are we in analysis paralysis? Are you taking too long, right? But if you say to them, hey, are you turtling? They're like, I kind of am, right? It just changes the whole conversation and it changes the mindset and the energy around what's happening here. When you can just break the internal dialogue, right? Of, he's going to tell me I'm taking too long and I'm going to have to, we're going to have to duke that out, right? But you know what? If you ask me if I'm turtling, I'm going to be like, yeah, maybe I am. It's a totally different energy. I love that. That's a great one.
All right, our final table here.
All right. I'll just use yours. We had one that was, we need to call more clients, right? We actually came up with 2 names, so we'll share both. The first one was frog eating. If you ever heard that expression of eat the frog, do the thing you like least first thing in the morning. And then we also came up with phone phobia.
I actually hadn't heard that one about frogs, but that makes a lot of sense because I wouldn't want to eat a frog in the morning. Okay. And the phone phobia. You're right. It's just like, I don't want to do that. Well, thank you all for coming up with some great examples. And as you can tell, Julie is really good at this. So she's got the pithy names always. So if you need any help with that, call Julie. But yeah, I think it's such an important piece just to really get it out there, name it, notice it. but then talk about it in a way that doesn't make people feel attacked or like you're berating them for not doing things. So we know that it's important first to get clear about where you're stuck. So where are you stuck in agreement, and what does it take to move into alignment? And to move into alignment requires being in dialogue. And so we talk about it's more important to talk than to tell, because we know that oftentimes being in conversation works amazingly well, whereas if you just tell someone or you send them an email or you print a poster and put it on the wall, they're probably not going to shift their behaviors and move into alignment. And so pausing and having a conversation, it's the difference between being in presentation mode versus in discussion mode. And I know that we know that takes time, it takes context, and it can sometimes be uncomfortable. But in order to go far fast to get aligned, that's what's required. And so to really connect with your team members about how are we going to do that. So we know where we're stuck. We've got phone phobia. Let's have a conversation about what that looks like, and let's set reasonable goals, and let's hold each other accountable, and then call each other in, right? I think there's a tendency to say, well, we're going to call you out because you didn't do what you didn't say you were going to do. You didn't do what you said you were going to do. I want to call you into the conversation. I know that we're all working toward this. This is our shared goal that we're working towards, and let's figure out how we're going to do that together. And so that's another important piece, is just to remember that this requires dialogue. And I think there's an old saying, you need to tell someone 10 times or 7 times before they're going to actually remember that you said that. Keep that in mind too. Like, you're probably going to have multiple conversations. And Karrikin's group, we do this too. I mean, we have multiple conversations about how we're going to do the different pieces of our business that are important to us. And we all have different definitions of the words we use, as Julie mentioned earlier. Like, when you say we're going to grow, well, we all think that means different things. And so pausing to have a conversation and say, well, this is what growth looks like to me, this is what I can commit to doing, is such an important piece of that. So we'd encourage you to take the time to be in dialogue with your team members and even your family members if you want to move into alignment toward shared outcomes. And I think it's important too that we start with ourselves, because it's really easy to want to change other people. And we like to say, that there's something, when something needs to change, it's probably you. You're the one who needs to change. And so to look in the mirror and say, how do I need to show up differently? What are the different communication tools that I need to lean into? Or, where am I getting frustrated? And where's a mindset that's holding me back that isn't making me want to work with, a colleague in a new way, or pick up the phone to call somebody? And so starting with self is such an important piece. And then that is how alignment is built, because every person has to do their own hard work to be in alignment. It can't, Julie always says this can't be outsourced. You can't delegate alignment to other people. You as the leader, and then as your teammates, everybody has to lean into that work, just like the tent pole, right? Like, not any one person can get the tent pole lowered to the ground. Everybody as a group has to get the tent pole lowered. So we'd love for you just to reflect about ways that you personally can lean into conversations in a new way to get to the goals that you're working on. So starting with self. All right.
And not losing sight of the fact that I had to start with self around my timesheet. Yeah, it can be tricky. We say, nothing changes until someone changes, and that someone is probably you. And as leaders, that can be really hard to accept. But I think it's really important to think about where are places where you can shift the conversation. As Kate said, as you think about where people are stuck in agreement and being frustrated with them, maybe the first step is thinking about where you're frustrated with them. It starts with how you're showing up with them in dialogue and in conversation. So are there ways that you can change that, that will help nudge them, again, not shove them into new ways of working with you?
So on your table, you also have an alignment evaluation tool. And this is a great resource to just start to have conversations with your team about where you feel like you're stuck in agreement. And so you'll see there's a circumflex there, and then examples of what we call the 7 signs of misalignment. And then on the back, there's a place where you can have this conversation and fill it in and figure out, okay, well, yep, typically we do have meetings where we have the same conversations over and over. Or we typically do have, everyone's status is green, but we aren't keeping up. So this is just a great way to have a neutral conversation that doesn't make anybody feel called out, but just as a group to start to say, wow, we are really stuck there and we'd like to move into alignment in a different way. We're going to send you this electronically as well, but you can obviously take the paper copies. And if you want to, you can click on the QR code to get a digital version. But we're planning to send out our deck and all of the stuff we've shared today tomorrow as well to you all. So this is just a really good conversation starter. So we love for you, as your call to action, to do the alignment evaluation tool with your teams, to share these conversations and these concepts with your colleagues. You could even do the temp poll if you want, the helium challenge as a way to get people up and engaged, because it's such a visceral experience, right? When the temp poll isn't going down, which is exactly what alignment feels like. It can be frustrating, it takes time. And then, of course, when it happens, it's very exciting. So, and remember that this all starts with you. I think that's such an important piece and something that is confronting, right? Because it's very confronting to recognize that maybe we're stuck and it's our mindsets that are holding us back. And then we have a learning and development program. It's a 6-week hybrid program where we teach the skills and the language of alignment. And so we call it our Karrikin's Alignment Accelerator. We have a cohort that's starting in September, but if there were enough folks here and you felt like your teams would be interested, we'd be happy to do a cohort just for the CCTW community. And we can offer you a 25% discount. So if you're interested in information about that, I'd love to share more, and Julie and Daniel can share more as well during our next hour of networking. But that's a really great program. And we find that when people do it with their colleagues, then they have a shared language to use, and that the work goes even faster. We had one of our group coaching calls this morning, and we have our alums come back every time. And she was sharing that because she'd done the work with her colleague, they were able to work together in a new way. They did a presentation to their organization. The organization was said, yes, we've noticed that you're working together in a new way, and we really appreciate that. We also appreciate that you shared vulnerably that you weren't working together very well, and that now you have a new language to do that. So I would think about that too for your teams, that it's helpful to go through it with somebody else in the organization.
Yeah, and Kate, before we close out, I would just open the floor. We have a couple of minutes to see if there's any questions or comments or thoughts that people have as you've leaned into this idea of moving your organization from agreement around things that are important as you grow your business into alignment and trying to get people working in a different way together towards those shared goals. So maybe we just open the floor up if there are any questions or comments.
Yeah, great. So Kristen was asking for a story about a client where they were struggling with agreement, and how did that look to move into alignment? One client example that's coming to mind for me is a team where there was a new CEO, and most of the leadership had been there for a long time. So there were a lot of tenured leaders, and the new CEO coming in was very disruptive for them. And so the new CEO's goal was to grow the business by quite a bit. So there was a lot of misalignment about what growth looked like in that example. And then just even like the building relationships piece, I think, was hard for them because they hadn't been working as a team in that way. And so we worked with this client 6 years ago, and actually just got to be with them a couple weeks ago in Scottsdale. They had another offsite, and the CEO brought us back because he said the work that they did, and we spent probably 4 months with them, meeting with them every other week and having these conversations about what are the shifts that they need to what are the shifts they need to work on? What are the trade-offs that they're navigating? Where do they experience blockers? And being in dialogue. I mean, we're talking like 4-hour sessions every other week. That work was so fundamental to their success that in the last 6 years, they've doubled their business. They've actually had a lot of turnover in their leadership team. And so they called us back to say, we need to do this again. We need to get really clear about what alignment looks like. We need everybody we did the helium challenge with them again, because he said, we keep saying that the difference between agreement and alignment, but our new leaders don't actually know what we're talking about. So we need to have that experience as a collective group again together. And we talked about the new trade-offs that they're navigating, right? Because they're a new team. And I was just really, from my perspective, really fulfilling to see that they still use the language, but most importantly, that they were working together horizontally and that they were pausing in their meetings to have conversations to help them lead in new ways.
Yeah, and in that example, the CEO when he first came in, was famous for saying, we need to go fast. Anybody else hear people say we need to go fast? And we asked 300 people in the room and said, what do you hear around here that we are in agreement with, but we're not in alignment with? And some guy said, we hear a lot that we need to go fast. And as second level leaders in this organization, we have no idea what that means or how to do it. Right? Like, so to go fast, we build these 12-step processes that take a year to do, right? Like, how do we, and the CEO was shocked. He was like, what do you mean you don't know how to go fast? Well, because we don't know what you mean, right? We don't understand that. So being in dialogue around things like that is part of what he was reflecting on, that really helped them to break through and get aligned as a leadership team and be able to actually go fast because they were speaking the same language. So that's just one example. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one more example that is coming to mind is where, as an accounting firm, where the senior leaders were also responsible for their own lines of business. And so they had to switch hats between I'm on the C-suite and I'm running my own book of business and I'm a service line leader. And being able to lead or, from an enterprise perspective was really challenging because they were, needed to meet their own goals, right? Like, I think that was such a hard thing for them to come to grips with, that they also needed to lead horizontally to keep the business growing as well. And so we had a lot of conversations about, well, when I'm in my, when I'm part of the executive team, that means that I need to be thinking about the whole business, not just my own service line. And they're accountants. So they were like, what is this kind of work? What are you talking about? Oh, and again, through a lot of conversation and on both of these stories, the CEO had a huge part in this. They were championing this work, they believed in it, and they were willing to put in the time and the resources to make this happen. I think that that's another important piece, is that the most senior leader in the organization needs to be ready to do the work too.
And as Kate said, this learning and development program, this isn't actually the core work that we do. We just kind of do this to get the word out and to help organizations that wouldn't necessarily do the full work to be able to get access to the content and the thinking. It's a great learning and development opportunity for up and coming leaders in your organization. So it's just something we really do almost just to get the word out about the power of alignment. And we'd love to welcome some CCTW people into that if it makes sense. Kate, you want to close us out?
Yeah, thank you all so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to get the tent pole lowered to the ground. We're going to be hanging out for the next hour, so we'd love to talk with you more. And this is the end of our workshop. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.